It was supposed to be a day of celebration, my birthday, a day I'd always cherished. But everything changed the moment I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. My husband, Tom, and his secretary, Emily, were plotting something I never saw coming: our divorce. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. How long had this been going on? Why would they do this to me on my special day? Little did they know I was about to turn the tables, and the truth would unravel in ways they never expected. It was the night of my birthday, a night I had eagerly awaited all year. The party was in full swing, and everything seemed perfect: friends laughing, music playing, and the scent of my favorite cake filling the air. My husband, Tom, stood by my side, always the charming man he'd been for the past decade. But there was something different tonight, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I dismissed the odd feelings, the way Tom kept glancing at his phone or the slight distance in his eyes. I figured it was work, the usual pressures he faced. He had always been the responsible one, the one I could rely on. But as the night wore on, a knot in my stomach grew tighter. Tom seemed more distracted than usual, as though he were somewhere else, mentally. It wasn't until much later, when the party had started winding down, that I began to sense that something wasn't right. I went into the kitchen to grab another drink, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling gnawing at me. The laughter from the living room faded as I opened the door to the kitchen, but the faint sound of low voices from the adjoining room caught my attention. It was Tom and Emily. Emily, his secretary, who had been at every event we had hosted lately. She was always around, always pleasant, and I had never thought twice about her. But tonight, there was a strange urgency in their voices, something I hadn't heard before. "She trusts you completely, Tom," Emily's voice said softly, almost too smooth. "She doesn't know a thing about what's really going on." My heart skipped a beat. What was she talking about? My mind was racing as I stood frozen in place, not daring to make a sound. I wanted to turn and walk away, but something inside me kept me rooted to the spot. "We can't keep doing this forever," Tom's voice replied, low and tense. "It's time to finish it. We need to do this before she starts asking too many questions." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My blood ran cold. What were they saying? What was it? What had been going on behind my back? Emily's voice cut through the silence again, softer now, but laced with something darker. "It's too risky. If she finds out too soon, well, you know how she is. She won't see it coming." I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on me. A sense of dread crept over me as the pieces started to fall into place. I thought I knew my husband, trusted him completely, but in that moment, it was as though the man I had loved for so long was a stranger. They were planning something. But what? Divorce? My mind screamed with the possibility. My heart thudded in my chest as I strained to hear more. But then I heard the door creak, and my pulse quickened. I had been standing there for what felt like hours, trying to piece together the fragments of their conversation. Was this a joke? A game? Or was it a reality I wasn't ready to face? As the voices became muffled, I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I had heard enough. The weight of their words hung heavily in the air, suffocating me. They were planning to take everything from me, from us, and they thought I was too blind to see it. I didn't know what to do next. Should I confront him? Call him out on the spot? I was paralyzed, unsure of the next move. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The trust I had given so freely was shattered, and the life we'd built together felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I left the kitchen quietly, my heart hammering in my chest. I needed to process everything, but I didn't know where to begin. The man I thought I knew was now a stranger, and I had no idea what to do next. As the night drew to a close, Tom came to check on me, his smile warm and reassuring. But I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The words he had spoken, the plan they had laid out, it was all too much to ignore. And so, I put on a smile, pretending everything was fine, knowing full well that I couldn't go back to the life I had known. In that moment, I realized that the quiet betrayal had already begun, and I had no choice but to find out the truth. The rest of the night was a blur. I could barely focus on the conversations around me as Tom tried to play the part of the loving husband. His smile felt like a mask, and every word he said was laced with a lie. I wanted to confront him right then and there. But I knew better than to give in to the overwhelming surge of anger and hurt that threatened to spill over. Instead, I forced myself to be calm, to act as if nothing had changed, when in reality, everything had. How could I go back to the life I thought I knew? The man I loved was standing next to me, but I didn't know who he was anymore. Once the guests had left and the house was quiet, I found myself alone with my thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation I had overheard, the way they spoke about me, the coldness in their voices. The words echoed in my mind. She trusts you completely. She doesn't know a thing about what's really going on. I could feel my hands trembling as I reached for my phone, dialing his number. He had already gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions, none of which I had answers for. I spent hours scrolling through our shared accounts, checking emails, and retracing the steps of our lives, trying to find clues. Every time I thought I had a lead, it would fade, as if he had erased all traces of his betrayal. He had always been meticulous, an expert at keeping things from me, but tonight I was determined to find the truth. The next morning when Tom left for work, I knew it was time. I had to dig deeper. As much as I had always trusted him, I needed to take control of this situation. It wasn't just about the money or his affair, it was about taking back the power I didn't even realize I had lost. He had thought he was the one in control, but he had no idea that I was already steps ahead. I spent the entire day researching, following small leads that might have otherwise slipped under my radar. I knew I had to be careful. If Tom suspected that I had found out, he would spin everything into a web of lies. But I couldn't let that stop me. I was unraveling his secrets one by one, and it felt like each new piece of information brought me closer to the truth. I started by looking into the finances. The money he had withdrawn from our joint account was a starting point. I found the recipient's name, but it didn't lead to anywhere significant. The name was untraceable, the records clouded by layers of transactions meant to hide the truth. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered something that made my blood run cold. An address in a different city, an address that was tied to a luxury apartment complex. I stared at the screen, my heart racing as I connected the dots. This wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully constructed plan, a web of lies he had been weaving for months. He was planning a future with her, and it didn't include me. My stomach churned as the realization hit me harder than I could have imagined. The hours ticked by as I sat there, poring over every detail, every transaction, every clue. I felt a wave of nausea, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I was so close to uncovering the full extent of his betrayal, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I hadn't anticipated how much this would change me. Before, I had been the wife, the one who supported him, who trusted him with everything. But now, I was something else. I was a woman who had learned the truth, and with that truth I had power. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I wasn't just a passive participant in this marriage anymore. I was the one holding all the cards, and Tom had no idea what was coming. The more I discovered, the more I realized that his affair wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was part of a larger plan. He had been preparing for this for months, maybe longer. And all this time, I had been blind to it. I knew I had to confront him, but I also knew I had to be strategic. I needed to expose him, to make him face the consequences of his actions. But I wasn't going to do it on his terms. I was going to make sure that when he saw the truth, it was on my terms. And when that moment came, he would finally realize that I was no longer the woman who blindly trusted him. I had found the power I never knew I had, and there was no going back. The discovery of my hidden power felt like a breath of fresh air, but it also came with a nagging sense of unease. I had built my own life, my own empire, one that my husband knew nothing about, but that didn't explain everything. The money he withdrew wasn't just a careless act. It was tied to something much darker. I could feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on me. Who was this woman? And why had he sent her such a large sum? I knew that the only way to truly understand what was going on was to follow the trail. So, I began my search, methodically, carefully, every detail calculated. If he thought he could keep secrets from me, he was about to learn just how deeply I could dig. I started with the phone records. I had always respected his privacy, but after what I had uncovered, that respect had faded. I needed answers, I found an unmarked number, one that hadn't been in his contact list before, a number that had been receiving frequent calls and texts. My stomach churned as I copied it into my phone, feeling the urge to know everything about this woman. I decided to call. It wasn't my first instinct, but my curiosity won out. The phone rang twice before it clicked on, and a woman's voice answered, soft and polite. "Hello?" I froze. My heart raced. What was I doing? But I pushed forward, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Hi, is this—" I hesitated. "Sarah?" There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a nervous laugh. "Who's this?" I couldn't believe I was doing this. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm his wife," I blurted out. The words left my mouth like a shot, raw and unfiltered. The silence on the other end was almost unbearable. For a long moment, there was no reply. Then, a soft sigh. "I thought you might be." My blood ran cold. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what came next, but the words were out there now and I couldn't take them back. "What's going on? Why is he sending you money?" The woman hesitated again, her voice barely a whisper. "He told me he was helping me. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Something shifted inside me. The calm tone, the regret in her voice, it didn't match the accusations I'd been building up in my mind. She wasn't the villain in this story, at least not entirely. I realized then that there was more to this than a simple affair. It was a twisted mess, a tangled web of lies, desperation, and manipulation. She wasn't some heartless mistress. She was someone caught up in something she couldn't control either. I pressed on, the words tasting bitter. "How long has this been going on?" "A year," she replied, her voice breaking. "He said he was going to leave you, that you weren't enough for him, that he wanted to be with me." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. How could he say such things? How could he lie to both of us like this? And yet I knew it wasn't just her fault. She wasn't the one who had taken the money from our account. He had. She wasn't the one who had betrayed me. The conversation continued, each word like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. She told me everything. How they met, how he had promised her a future, how she had believed him, even when the signs were clear that something wasn't right. She had no idea about the business I ran, the life I had quietly built for myself. All she knew was the man he had painted himself to be. The man who had promised her everything, and then turned his back on her when it suited him. As I hung up the phone, the weight of what I had learned settled in. It wasn't just the betrayal of money, it was the betrayal of trust, of promises, of the life we had built together. He had lied to both of us, and in the process he had underestimated me. Now I had all the pieces, every conversation, every lie. The truth was within my reach, and this time I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The days following my discovery were a blur. The more I learned, the more I felt like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Every time I thought I knew the full extent of Tom's betrayal, I uncovered something new, something more devastating. I had no idea how long this had been going on, but it was clear that everything I had thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, keeping track of every detail, every email and every transaction I could find. Each new piece of information was like a dagger to my heart, but it also gave me the strength to continue. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was a woman who had been betrayed, and now I was taking control. It was late one evening when I finally made my decision. I had all the pieces, everything I needed to confront Tom and expose his lies. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that our life together was normal. I knew I had to face him, to finally ask the questions that had been eating away at me for days. Tom had come home from work late as usual. He always seemed to be working late these days, and I knew better than to believe his excuses anymore. He walked through the door, his usual smile on his face, but there was something different in his eyes, something that didn't match the man I had spent so many years with. I could feel the tension building between us, thick and suffocating. "Hey, how was your day?" he asked, his voice too casual. "Let's talk," I replied, my tone steady but sharp. I wasn't going to let him spin this into some harmless misunderstanding. I had all the facts now, and I wasn't backing down. He looked taken aback, his smile faltering just for a moment. "Talk about what?" "About you and Emily," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. "About the affair," The money and the divorce. Tom's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the right words, but none came. For a moment he stood there, completely frozen. I could see the panic in his eyes, but it was too late for him to lie his way out of this one. I had already seen the truth. "How long, Tom?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with fury. "How long have you been planning this behind my back? How long have you been using Emily and betraying me?" He finally found his voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. I didn't want you to find out like this. I was going to tell you, I swear. You were going to tell me?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "How? After everything you've done, you thought you could just tell me and expect me to forgive you? You've been lying to me for months, Tom. I know about the lawyer, about the property, about everything." The color drained from his face. He took a step back, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. But there was no way out now. He had been caught, and there was no escaping the truth. Emily and we were planning to leave," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. But it did, and now, you think I'm just going to stand here and listen to your excuses?" I said, my anger rising with every word. "You think you can throw everything we've built together away and just walk out with her?" He looked at me, his eyes full of guilt, but also something else. Fear. I had never seen him like this before. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who called the shots. But now, he was standing in front of me, stripped of his power, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't expect you to understand, but I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and rage. "Why did you betray me like this?" For a moment, there was only silence between us. He didn't answer, and I didn't expect him to. There were no words that could make this right. There was nothing he could say that would undo the damage he had caused. I looked at him, not as the man I had loved, but as a stranger, someone who had destroyed everything I thought I knew about our marriage. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized something important. I didn't need him. Not anymore. The power that had once belonged to him was now mine. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let him steal it from me again. The man who had once been my partner was gone, and I was standing at the beginning of a new chapter. As I walked away from him, I knew this was just the start. There would be more to come, more truths to uncover. But for now, I was done. The lie had been exposed, and I was ready to move on. The game was over, and I had won. I walked away from Tom that night, feeling the weight of everything that had just been exposed. The power, once so firmly held in his hands, now shifted to me. And with that shift came a flood of emotions. Anger, betrayal, but also an undeniable sense of liberation. I had taken control, exposed his lies, and now I was free. Or at least, I would be, once I made the decision to move forward. But the storm inside me still raged. I had taken that first step, but the journey was far from over. The days following the confrontation felt like a blur. I spent my time reflecting, working through the layers of pain and betrayal that threatened to consume me. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt cold and foreign, as though everything inside it was a reminder of the life Tom had built behind my back. I knew the next step was crucial. I couldn't afford to make a rash decision. I had to think through every detail. What would my life look like without him? How would I rebuild the trust that had been shattered? I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of his betrayal any longer. I started by focusing on myself. I took long walks, spent time with friends who had supported me from the beginning, and began to reconnect with parts of myself that I had long neglected. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I thought I'd never escape the weight of the past, but each step forward brought me closer to the woman I had always been, the woman I was becoming again. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning how to live for myself once more. I walked away from that confrontation stronger than I had ever been. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had learned to stand on my own, to fight for myself, and to never let anyone, not even the man I had loved, take away my power again. The life I was going to build would be mine, and no one could take that from me.